The last thing Nathaniel heard his pregnant wife say before she disappeared was not, "I love you." It was, "Go spend Christmas with her." He thought she was talking about another woman. He thought it was a strange joke, born from exhaustion and pregnancy hormones. But when he woke the next morning in their Chicago apartment and found her side of the bed cold, her coat missing, and a folded note sitting beneath the Christmas tree, Nathaniel's heart seemed to stop. Outside, snow covered the city in a quiet white blanket. But inside their home, everything had suddenly gone dark. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change a life in ways we never expect. Nathaniel had spent the previous evening believing he had everything under control. He was 38, successful, stubbornly independent, and proud of the life he had built with his wife, Grace. They lived in a beautiful high-rise overlooking downtown Chicago, and that Christmas was supposed to be the most important Christmas of their lives, because Grace was 8 months pregnant with their first child. Their apartment glowed with warm lights. A massive Christmas tree stood beside the windows, and tiny gifts were arranged beneath it. Grace had spent weeks preparing everything. Even though her swollen feet made walking painful, Nathaniel had promised himself that after the holidays, he would slow down and become the husband and father she deserved. But there was one shadow in their marriage that Nathaniel rarely spoke about. Before he met Grace, he had been deeply in love with a woman named Rebecca. Their relationship had ended years earlier after a bitter argument and a series of selfish choices Nathaniel was still ashamed of. Rebecca had eventually moved away, and Nathaniel had convinced himself that the past was dead. Then, 3 weeks before Christmas, he discovered through a mutual friend that Rebecca was back in Chicago and struggling after losing her job. Nathaniel had never told Grace because he was afraid of what she might think. Grace, however, already knew. She had found an old photograph hidden inside a box in the closet, and with it was a letter Nathaniel had written to Rebecca years before. Grace could have confronted him. She could have screamed, demanded answers, or accused him of betrayal. Instead, she quietly read the letter, placed it back where she found it, and carried the secret in her heart. She knew Nathaniel had chosen her, but she also sensed there was something unfinished inside him. That was why, on Christmas Eve, when Grace looked at him with tired eyes and told him to go spend Christmas with Rebecca, Nathaniel felt wounded and angry. He told himself Grace must not trust him. He told himself she was trying to punish him. What he didn't understand was that Grace had spent the entire day making a decision that would break her own heart. After Nathaniel fell asleep that night, Grace walked slowly through the apartment, one hand resting beneath her stomach. She stopped beside the Christmas tree and touched a tiny silver ornament Nathaniel had bought for their unborn daughter. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered a prayer for her husband, her baby, and the future she feared she might never see. Then she packed a small suitcase, took the medical folder from the kitchen drawer, and left. At sunrise, Nathaniel woke with a terrible feeling in his chest. He called Grace. No answer. He searched the apartment, then noticed the note beneath the tree. His hand shook as he opened it. Grace had written that she was leaving not because she stopped loving him, but because she believed he needed to confront the part of himself that still carried guilt and unfinished pain. She told him she had gone to stay with her older sister, Miriam, in Milwaukee until after the baby was born. She needed space, and she needed to know whether Nathaniel truly loved the family he had created or was simply afraid of losing it. Nathaniel collapsed into the chair beside the tree. For the first time in years, the successful businessman who could negotiate million-dollar contracts and control an entire room had no idea what to do. He stared at the empty space where Grace had stood, and finally understood that his wife had not left because she hated him. She had left because she loved him enough to stop carrying his emotional burdens for him. Nathaniel drove through the snow to find Rebecca. He expected anger, jealousy, or some dramatic reunion. Instead, he found Rebecca working at a small community shelter near the South Side. She looked older, tired, and peaceful. When Nathaniel explained why he had come, Rebecca listened without interrupting. Then she told him something that changed everything. She said she had never wanted him back. She had already forgiven him years ago. What she could not understand was why he was still punishing himself for something that had ended long before Grace entered his life. Nathaniel broke down. He realized he had spent years carrying guilt because guilt made him feel responsible. It was easier to punish himself than to accept that he was allowed to become a better man. Rebecca told him that Grace had probably seen this before he did. She told him that if he wanted his marriage to survive, he needed to stop looking backward and start showing up for the people standing beside him. Nathaniel returned to Chicago that night and began changing everything. He took leave from work. He cleaned the apartment. He finished assembling the crib Grace had been waiting for him to build. He wrote her a letter every day, not asking her to come home, but telling her what he was learning. He apologized without making excuses. He admitted that he had been emotionally distant, that he had hidden his past instead of dealing with it, and that he had taken Grace's love for granted. 3 weeks later, Grace went into labor. Nathaniel was driving through a snowstorm when Miriam called him. He rushed to Milwaukee General Hospital with his heart pounding. When he reached the maternity ward, he found Grace exhausted but conscious. He stood at the doorway, afraid she might ask him to leave. Instead, she reached for his hand. Their daughter was born just before midnight. They named her Hannah, because Grace had always loved the biblical story of a woman who prayed through pain and never gave up hope. Nathaniel held his newborn daughter against his chest and cried so hard that the nurse quietly stepped away to give him a moment. Grace watched him from the hospital bed. There was still pain between them. Their marriage was not magically repaired because a baby had been born. Forgiveness would take time. Trust would take time. But for the first time, Nathaniel understood that love was not something you proved with expensive gifts, promises, or perfect Christmas mornings. Love was choosing to stay honest when honesty was difficult. It was showing up when someone was hurting. It was accepting that the people we love deserve our best selves, not the broken pieces we refuse to repair. Months later, Nathaniel and Grace stood together beside their Christmas tree with baby Hannah sleeping peacefully between them. Outside, Chicago was covered in snow again. Nathaniel looked at Grace and remembered the morning he thought she was gone forever. She had not abandoned him. She had given him one final chance to become the man he kept promising to be. And sometimes the person who walks away is not leaving to destroy your life. Sometimes they step back because they are praying that you will finally realize what you have before it is too late. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe so we can continue bringing you stories about love, faith, forgiveness, and second chances. Before we end, comment "Love deserves a second chance" if you believe that people can grow beyond their mistakes and that forgiveness can sometimes become the beginning of a beautiful new life. Nathaniel never forgot that Christmas Eve. Every year afterward, when the snow began falling over Chicago and the lights appeared in the windows, he would look at Grace and Hannah and remember the morning he woke to an empty home. He had once believed that morning was the worst moment of his life. Years later, he understood the truth. It was the morning that saved it.